Welcome to the Open to Hope Show. I'm your host, Dr. Gloria Horsley, with my daughter and co-host,
Dr. Heidi Horsley.
Well, Heidi, we're going to be talking about adjusting to life without a dad. And I know that this has been for you in the last 4 years.
Yep. As you know, my dad died October 2020 during COVID. And yeah, it's been a big adjustment, especially at the beginning, because I didn't know my life without my dad. Who am I without my dad? He's been in my life all my life. So,
well, we're going to talk today about adjusting to life without a dad, and we are going to talk to people who have had dads die, and also people who are experts in the field that can talk to you about how you can help family members when you've had a dad die.
Absolutely, Mom. So we have 3 guests today that have had a father die. You've had a father die. I've had a father die. And they died in various ways. I mean, my father died of a staph infection in the hospital. Your dad died of
a stroke.
A stroke, that's what I thought. So we'll introduce them and find out how they found hope after this loss. Okay, so sitting next is, coincidentally, all of our guests today's fathers are veterans.
That's interesting.
And
my dad, was a veteran also.
My dad wasn't a veteran, but my son is a veteran.
Right.
so it's just a coincidence. But so next to you is Joelle Mulheron. I wanted to say that right, Joelle.
Thank you.
Okay, so you are a Washington, D.C. public policy expert with more than 25 years of service to the nation's governors, the White House, and nonprofits. In 2010, your infant daughter died from a terminal illness, and your father, a veteran, died during the COVID-19 pandemic. Joelle has created Evermore, an organization dedicated to providing holistic bereavement care to children and families. So welcome, Joelle.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
And next to you is Dr. Eric Brewer.
Yes.
Eric is founder and senior pastor of Transformed Church Global Ministries. You are a COVID-19 survivor and widower. Your wife Holly died, and you are now remarried to Tiffany Williams.
Yes.
Your father died in 2008?
2008, December 20th, 2008.
December 20th of 2008 of a heart attack.
Yes.
And you have written your doctoral dissertation, which was entitled Healing Hidden Wounds, The Resilience of Black Men and the Impact of Their Spirituality Upon Their Grief Recovery.
Yes.
Eric founded and leads a national weekly support group for Black widowers.
Yeah.
Welcome, Eric.
Thank you.
And next to Dr. Eric is Dr. Jill Harrington. Hi, Jill. Jill's been on our show before, as you know, Mom. She is an assistant professor of social work at Marymount University. She is a widow. Her husband died, leaving her with 2 young children to raise. She has a private practice in Washington, D.C., and her fiancé is David Carey. Wonderful guy. She is on the advisory boards of Hospice Foundation of America Autism and Grief Programs and the Tragedy Assistance Program for Survivors. Your dad dies of prostate cancer, and when did he die?
2015.
2015.
On my sister's birthday.
Wow, on your sister's birthday. And I know you've also lost your mother.
Yes, she died 14 months later.
14 months later.
From COPD.
Okay. And you are the creator and lead editor of the book Superhero Grief, The Transformative Power of Loss. My mom has a chapter in it, and you have a new book coming out.
And so does Joelle, and Eric has one in the upcoming. But the book was actually dedicated to both my parents. It was my narrative therapy, really, after the loss of both my parents and pretty much a year apart from each other.
Wow.
You know, what comes up with me with this, Heidi, with everybody, and thanks for being on the show today, is that we as adults have lost fathers, right?
Yes.
This is a very minimized loss for adults because we think, oh, you're an adult, you've lost a parent, big deal. You know, we focus on kids losing parents, families, you know, how do we help young kids and all that kind of thing. But it is a big problem as adults getting the kind of support we need for a loss that is big to us.
I agree with you, Mom, because in my case, my father lived a long life and he lived a good life. But that doesn't mean I don't miss him. And that doesn't mean that I didn't have to adjust, and that doesn't mean that I didn't have to say, wow, who am I going to call and share things with, and who am I going to make proud now that he's gone? So
I would absolutely agree with that statement. It's minimized and disenfranchised. I lost both my parents in the course of almost a year, and I felt like an orphan. And sometimes I actually still do. I still remember when my mother died, a week before she was put in the hospital, saying to me, we were having a conversation, and she was crying, and I kind of just gave her permission. I said, Mom, it's okay, because she had COPD, she was really suffering. She said, it's not okay because you just lost your father. I don't want to leave you girls alone in this world as orphans. And I felt orphaned at 46 years old, losing both my parents back to back. But there's no place in society that really, in a way, I felt that way, but is kind of disenfranchised and not recognized. So, you know, truly the definition of an orphan is someone under the age of 18. And, you know, someone who, I think the orphan is the person who needs nurturing and mentoring, but I still felt that way. I felt like I had no, and actually coming here to the studio, I'm originally from New York. My dad had worked here as a fireman many years ago, but then he got into the operations side of building management. He worked for a company called Mendick Realty, which then got bought over by Vornado. And as a kid, I was really lucky to be at the top of buildings watching the fireworks on 4th of July. But as I came up through Penn Station, the city always reminds me of my dad because he worked here. And I'm coming up from Penn Station, and right in front of me was 2 Penn Plaza with, they had scaffolding that it says property of Vornado company. And I just started crying when I came off. It's a beautiful connection.
Yeah,
but
it's
I
like
walk
a sign
around,
from your dad.
I walk around the city, and there is this kind of duality of love and loss, that connection with my dad, wanting to call him up, go to his office, see him, do all the things we did together.
There are historians. Eric, how about you? You were talking earlier about there was an experience around your dad's death. And I think also we've got 2 women here, death of a dad, and here's a guy, death of a dad.
Yes.
What does it mean to a guy to lose
So
a dad?
my father was, of course, a military man, and he raised us with great discipline. And my brother and I have so much to thank him for. We thought he was kind of harsh on us, but he made us to be the great men that we are today, family men, men of respect and integrity and character. My father was big on character and integrity. And he gave us a strong work ethic. And so he always was trying to show us how to do things with excellence and do things better. So my grandfather died in the early 1980s. It snowed in Detroit. He shoveled, caught pneumonia, died 2 weeks later.
I had a grandfather that way too.
My father shoveled the driveway, rain, heavy snow, drove down like a quarter of a mile down from the house, had a massive heart attack, hit a telephone pole wires, and they couldn't get to him because they had to turn off all the power. And he died in his car.
Wow.
And so the very first snowstorm, I shoveled my sidewalk. And that negative thought, you're going to die like your grandfather. You're going to die like your father. And I told myself, I'm not going to die like them shoveling snow. I had a snow blower in the garage. I said, get the snow blower.
Or dialing someone, kid down the street, give him a
I would not do that. And but it taught me to not do things what they did. Of course, self-care, to make sure, go to the doctor and do things of that nature. My father did take care of himself, but he had a lot of blockage in his heart. We found out 95% and 90% of so, he knew it, but he decided not to do the quadruple bypass, and eventually it caught him. And so with that, I had to grieve. I missed my dad because I needed him to make certain decisions as a pastor, and even when I lost my late wife, I wondered, what would my father say to me? And so I had to grow up in my grief, and I had to keep reminding myself, what would my father say? What would be his advice
I
in
love
life?
that.
Still have
I
that
always think
dialogue.
the same thing.
Yes.
You're all nodding. I think the same thing. What would my father say to me right now?
Yes,
How would he advise me?
yes.
Joelle, what's coming up for you?
Well, that's exactly what I was just thinking when he was saying that.
Yes.
Yeah, my dad helped set my moral compass in life.
Yes.
And so when there are difficult decisions to make or something that, I think he'd be proud of, it's something that I want to share with him, but unfortunately, he's not here to hear that. So it can be hard.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking about people watching this show and I have had a husband die and I've got kids. The dad dies. I'm hearing what you guys got from your dads. It's pretty wonderful, really. What about what's going on today in terms of getting support for people, say younger people, kids and families who have had a dad die? I know you're working on some of that, and I know, Pastor, you are, and you've been involved, Jill.
I think there's a lot out there for children. I don't think there's necessarily a lot out there for people 20, 30, 40, middle age.
You know, our number one visit is adults losing parents at Open to Hope, because there's so little
Very little.
support. What do we need?
I think we need professional help. We have to get rid of the stigma that seeking therapy or professional counseling, something is wrong with me. And as we know, grief is universal. Regardless of what age, it's normal, as it's necessary, it's natural. Grief is the natural response to loss. And that is proof that you love. So if you loved your parents and you are grieving your father, reach out and get help, talk to someone, get professional counseling. A lot of men don't want to reach out because I want to cry, I want to emote, I want to seem like I'm weak. But get rid of all that false, toxic macho-isms and all that other stuff, toxic masculinity, and get help.
I like that, toxic masculinity. Well, I think this comes up with something your organization works with, and that how do you fund these things? And you know, you say get therapy, people don't have the money. I mean, I think peer support is kind of what you're doing.
Well, what I was going to offer too, I think just having these conversations in public and normalizing that we all have losses, including our parents. And I think that's, I will say, the first step in sort of bringing that issue more out of the shadows. And certainly you're having a lot of people visit your website to learn more. One of the issues that we're working on in Washington, D.C., I think to your point, is that for children who are under the age of 18 and who lose one or both parents, right now we know the majority of children, parentally bereaved children in the United States, are not receiving the Social Security benefits that their parents paid into. And that is one of the most generous federal benefits there is. And as a result of the families not receiving those funds, children who've lost a parent are more likely to attain less in school, live in greater poverty, and then earn fewer wages for the rest of their life. And I'll tell you, I think this is a shocking statistic, that if we were, as a nation, to confer the outstanding benefits that right now are not being offered or provided to these children, these eligible children, it's as high as $15 billion a year. That's a lot of money for families.
Wow.
And I would just say to any of your viewers or listeners, if you know someone who's under the age of 18, a child who has lost a parent, they may be eligible for Social Security benefits that their parents earned. And it is important to call the Social Security Administration and see if they are eligible and if they can have those benefits conferred onto them.
Interesting. I'm wondering for Jill, because you had kids under 18 when their dad died, your husband, your former husband. You went to TAPS, right? I mean, tell us a little bit about TAPS, what it is and how that helped them, because I know they were involved in those programs.
Sure. So TAPS is the Tragedy Assistance Program for survivors, and it's for families that have lost, families or anyone who've lost a loved one in military service. So they had it's called the Good Grief Camp. And that's where my children really found a place to be able to really attend to their grief. I had been working, we started off in a peer support group called Peter's Place in Philadelphia, but then we wanted a little bit more specialized understanding of what it was like to have a military family member die. There are different things that influence some of our grief, but we did not experience that issue that you're talking about. That's why my jaw is kind of dropping, neither one of my children. I'd like to say that I think that some people do really benefit from professional therapy and help, but I think what would be really great for adult loss, because we do have a lot of services geared toward children and families, but for adults like ourselves that lose a parent maybe later in life, is I think just having the spaces, whether it's a peer support group, a church group, not everybody needs therapy, some people do, but that openness, like you were talking about, that I'm grieving, I'm hurting, but I think having the spaces that give permission to say this is an enfranchised kind of grief. You know, when my parents both died, when my dad died, you know, it's hard to find grief support groups specifically for the adult loss of a parent. And so I think saying that, because, you know, your parents are supposed to die before you, that's sort of part of the natural order.
Yes.
And as much as, like you said, your dad had a long life, it doesn't mean the loss doesn't hurt anymore, but there's really no place to talk about that and get support around that.
And you can also have had a terrible relationship with your father.
And I could talk
And
to that.
that is one where you may not have a chance to work it through, and you thought you'd be able to do that.
Yeah, I was very fortunate.
And you can't, you know.
In my teenage years, my dad and I'm sorry to interrupt, but I didn't have a terrible, but my parents went through a divorce. And so it kind of ruptured my relationship with my dad in my teenage years. And my mom, before she died, kind of admitted to a little bit of that parental alienation. But we wound up, why I think our adult relationship was even stronger than when I was a child, was we went through that repair in my 20s. But I do have friends and colleagues who, most recently a friend whose father basically abandoned her and recently died, and she wasn't even named in the obituary as a child of his. And she was really surprised at her reaction to learning that her biological father had died. It was very traumatizing for her to not even be named in the family obituary as his child.
Ambivalent relationships can be just as hard to work through. I see them a lot in my practice. You know, Eric brought up something which I think is true. Sometimes there's messages that adult males feel like, okay, I don't want to seek therapy because that's a sign of weakness. And I worked with the FDNY, the fire department in New York, for 10 years after 9/11. And we felt that a lot of the firefighters needed support. They had lost people in the Trade Center, friends, fathers, etc. But, you know, other firefighters, 343 firefighters died. But they were not going to listen to anybody but other men. So what they did is made like public service announcements from the firefighters coming in saying, hey, we're firefighters at the FDNY, we go to therapy, it's okay to go, it's not a sign of weakness.
Yes.
Which was pretty impactful.
And I think also a key point, what you just mentioned, is the fatherhood wound. And when it's unresolved and the father dies, now we have a compounded situation. And I've dealt with so many men who have unresolved fatherhood wounds. And then how do you then help them deal with that grief, and they're angry at their father and missing them at the same time?
The father they wanted, too.
Absolutely.
I love this idea. You can be angry at your father and still miss him. These two things can exist together.
I always like to say to, when I was doing therapy, to clients who go to their parents, sometimes I have to say to them, going to your father for this is not going to work. He hasn't got it. We like to believe that our parents have everything.
And they're withholding.
And they're withholding. They're withholding. They've got all that. They got that love. They got that understanding. They don't necessarily always have it. I would say to them, look, this is like going to a fruit store to get candy. You can keep going there every day, and it's not necessarily there. You got to take what you can get. If all you can get is Thanksgiving dinner, or being together at Christmas or a birthday, that's all you're going to get.
Well, and I think sometimes we compare our relationships with other people's and say, I want this relationship that this person has. So.
And I think that's a great point when a lot of individuals compare their relationship with other parent-child relationships, their friends, and so forth. And what I learned, because my daughter had a lot of friends who had absentee fathers, and I ended up being that, I was a pastor, but I was also a surrogate father to a lot of her friends. And we used to go on vacation together. And I used to speak to young ladies and said to them, I know you have expectations. It's unfair to have these high expectations from your dad, he may not have been exposed to this type of fatherhood.
Exactly.
And you're trying to get water from a rock.
Right.
I like that.
Just release it.
Right.
And there's a term called reparenting. And sometimes even as
Yeah.
adults, I tell the widowers, you have to reparent yourself.
Yes.
So what would you do differently now that you know who your father really is?
Right.
In life, you can't continue to blame your father, but you have to take responsibility for your life. Remove the blame off of your father and say, I am fully responsible. I have responsibility. I have the ability to respond to life and all the negative cards that was dealt me. And I'm going to reparent myself in a way that from this point forward, I'm moving in wholeness.
Yeah, and I think they say, be the change you want to see.
Start with the man in the mirror.
Joel, I want to
That's
ask you, I know that you've probably been working on parental leave. Have you done anything? I mean, not just parental, but grief leave. I mean, for an adult who loses a parent, they're not going to get any grief leave. They'll probably get less than anybody in the universe.
Yeah, we did lead a coalition a couple of years ago that inserted paid bereavement leave it would have included parental leave, parental loss, as well. It made it mostly through the House, but then was pulled out before. It was part of a much larger bill. I won't get into sort of the technicalities, but the important thing was, at least from my perspective, it was the first time that paid bereavement leave was entering into the national conversation. There have been a lot of efforts, and notable efforts, to just get leave, but for so many people and the state of financial affairs in the United States, they don't have the luxury to not get a paycheck.
But
And so
you're doing something now with veterans, aren't you? What did
we
I
were
read? Okay.
we were. Well, so now veterans, we were able to help a couple of years ago get part of a bill through the Senate where the U.S. Armed Forces now have 2 weeks of paid leave for the death of a child and a spouse.
Okay.
But not a parent.
Not a parent.
Yeah.
They're just, I will say, we
Which is
did work
kind of
on that.
interesting.
We worked on that last year, and there is some pretty extensive guidance that the Senate released. It got through the House, but it didn't get through the Senate, and the Senate released some pretty extensive language as to why a parent wouldn't necessarily qualify.
What was their language?
I will not. It was very eloquently written. I will say it was very eloquently written. It was effectively that it wouldn't be as pressing
Yeah.
Interesting.
for a
We wouldn't
parent,
be as sad.
for a
Right, Joe?
child or a
It
spouse.
wouldn't be as
Or
impactful.
pressing.
Well, and I think, I'm sorry, just on that point, I think a lot of people think of this issue as people are just sad.
Yeah.
And if you do have a parent die, you might be the
Oh, yeah.
executor of their estate
Oh, you're
and be
living
deployed
with them.
overseas. Yeah.
Caregiver burnout is so
Yes.
huge in this nation, and it's
Absolutely.
a lot of people are taking care of their parents,
Yep.
and they're with them all the time. And Jill did a wonderful piece for ADAC about taking care of her dad with prostate cancer. Huge.
I remember that was in 2016, and I'm just revisiting all of that, and having to take care of two parents. And now my fiance David, his mom just died last year after really at 89 of ovarian cancer, for which she lived a good 2 years with good quality of life. But he works for the retired military, works for the federal government now, and he was running back and forth between Indiana and the Washington D.C. area, and very special and close relationship with his mother, and I really encouraged him to take the time off. He's also, a veteran, and it's, you power through it and you just kind of motor on, and I really encouraged him to take the time off to attend to his grief.
It would be
and-
interesting to look at how soon people who've been taking care of their parents have health issues or die themselves. Because you're talking about maybe people in their 50s taking care of people in their 70s, and how fat is anybody really looking at that? I don't know. It would be an interesting
Well, his sister
study.
was a teacher. She wanted to go right back to work. She did take time for herself, but she kind of that was for her, like being at home and focusing on not having mom there. And I can understand some people do want to go back to work, but the problem is sometimes you don't have an option. You don't have the option to have the time off. When my late husband died, I was taking care of my children. The only reason I got extended leave was because I got hoof and mouth over something. I got a virus, and I took medical leave. So I got an extended period. I got sick. I lost 20 pounds, and I just was attributing it to grief.
Yep. Well, let me close the show, and I want everybody to know how they can get in touch with you guys, because you're powerhouses. Tell them all about your organization, Joelle.
Thank you. You can find more about our work at evermore.org, and there's some resources there. We are largely focused on bereavement policy and systems change. We are not a therapeutic center. We do not offer therapy. There's lots of very other qualified people who do that.
But if you're interested in system change, you could probably volunteer to help you out,
Yes,
right?
yes, absolutely.
And join your organization.
Yeah.
And tell us what your mission is again.
Making the world a more livable place for all bereaved people.
Thank you.
I love that.
Yes.
And Eric, how about you? Where can we find you?
TransformChurchGlobal.org, TransformChurchGlobal.org. I'm also the founder of Strong Tower, a refuge place for widowers. I have a book that's coming out in 2025 in January, From Grief to Growth, 31 Journey of Love and Loss.
From grief to growth. I like that.
I love that. Michelle.
You could find me, an assistant professor at Marymount University in Arlington. A big shout out for our new MSW program if you're interested in an MSW.
Ooh.
We're
Love it.
a brand new MSW program, but you can also find me at drjillharrington.com or superherogrief.com.
Awesome. So if you got one piece of advice for an adult who's lost their kid, what would it be?
You lost their father?
I mean, who's lost their dad?
Yeah. Be relentlessly kind to yourself and just give yourself permission to have the feelings that you have.
Thank you.
Just appreciate every day and tell yourself you're getting better every day.
I like that.
I would have to agree with Joelle is, give yourself permission. I still miss my parents every single day. I miss my dad's very Bronx, New York accent. And I lean on that enduring relationship that we were talking about. Sometimes I'll be like, I'll hear my mom saying, "You gonna wear your hair that way?" Or, I hear my dad's kind of sage advice with his Bronx accent going, "Jill, you really want to do that?" So I would say give yourself permission and don't listen to what other people say. You'll get like 3 days of bereavement leave and maybe like a couple of weeks, but you're supposed to just journey on. It's a lifelong process.
Absolutely.
Yep. Heidi, do you have any?
Oh my gosh, really? Putting me on the spot. Let's see, do I have any advice?
For people who've just lost their dad?
I don't know. I would just think of what is my dad going to say, right? He was the magic, but there is hope again, there is joy again.
Yep.
You just, and as my dad always quoted Winston Churchill, and he said, "If you're in hell, keep on going."
Heidi and I want to thank everybody for joining us on this show today. And we want to say that if you've lost hope, please lean on ours until you found your own, and God bless.